Before the rule of House Targaryen, all of Westeros was in chaos. From the day it had known the first steps of man, the land had known nothing but war, grief, and suffering. The kings, lords, and princes were a petty lot of men who contended with one another for land and gold and glory, and all fought against Aegon's attempts to bring order to the land. But they were as disorganized as they were grasping, and they lacked the one thing, the one advantage Aegon possessed: dragons. With such beasts of war at his command, he laid waste to Harrenhal and destroyed 2 kings upon the field of fire. The year was 2 BC when he began his conquest, setting sail from Dragonstone with a small army. 2 years later, the Conqueror was crowned and anointed by the High Septon of Oldtown, with much of the continent subdued. It was his strong hand that brought peace forcibly to Westeros. Thus, the dawn of a new era had begun, the reign of the dragons. But while Aegon was proclaimed the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, 3 remained defiant to his rule. The first on the Conqueror's attention was in the Bight, home to the 3 sisters. These lonely islands lay between the north and the Vale of Arryn, and both kingdoms warred over them for 1,000 years. Its denizens, the Sistermen, were in many ways the eastern cousins of the Ironborn. They once boasted their own cruel kings, pirates, and reavers, who would prowl the narrow sea and the shivering sea with impunity. That era ended when the Arryns finally incorporated the islands into their realm, but their grasp had always been tenuous at best, and the Sistermen long dreamt of the day where they would become a kingdom in their own right. Their chance came during the conquest, when Aegon and his sisters warred against their Arryn overlords. The Sistermen saw an opportunity in the chaos and seceded from the Eyrie, declaring themselves a free nation, with Marla Sunderland as their queen. This act of rebellion would not go unanswered for long, once the conquest had ended. With the Arryn fleet in ruins, Aegon Targaryen commanded Torrhen Stark, the newly appointed Warden of the North, to end the rebellion. The Lord of Winterfell mustered a northern army and hired Braavosi Salsails to carry them across the Bight, under the command of Sir Warwick Manderly, a knight of White Harbor. But they were not alone. With them flew Queen Visenya and Vhagar. The sight of the dragon and the Northmen broke the resolve of the Sistermen. They deposed their queen and installed her younger brother, Stephen Sunderland, as the Lord of the 3 Sisters. He promptly bent the knee to Visenya, renewed his fealty to the Eyrie, and surrendered 2 of his sons to the Arryns and Manderlys. Thus ended the short-lived kingdom of the 3 Sisters, which had lasted less than 2 years. Next on the Dragons' agenda was their western counterparts in the Iron Islands. For many centuries, the Black Line had dominated the Iron Men with their cunning and cruelty. But when Harren the Black and his sons met their fiery ends, all the islands fell to infighting, as countless would-be kings rose and fell. One such was Corran Volmark, a minor lord of Harlaw, whose grandmother had been a younger sister to Harwin Hardhand. On the basis of that tie, he declared himself the rightful heir to the Black Line. Another was the priest king Lodos, who proclaimed himself the living son of the drowned god. For more than a year, their followers fought one another on land and sea, and drenched their islands in blood and iron. Aegon Targaryen put an end to all of that in 2 BC, when he and Balerion descended upon the islands with a massive war fleet. Volmark fell at the Conqueror's hand with his Valyrian steel blade, Blackfire, while Lodos drowned himself when he walked into the sea, seeking his father's counsel. Near the end, many Ironborn hailed the coming of the dragons, and their surviving lords yielded and bent their knees before House Targaryen. But who would rule them? Some of Aegon's lords insisted that the Iron Islands be made vassals to the Tullys of Riverrun or the Lannisters of the Rock. Some even urged that they be given over to Winterfell. A few even went so far as to insist that the king should scour the islands clean in Dragonflame, putting an end to the menace of the Ironborn for all time. Aegon listened to each in turn, but in the end he decided a different course. He gathered the lords of the Iron Islands and declared that he would allow them to choose their own Lord Paramount. Unsurprisingly, they chose one of their own, Vigon Greyjoy, the Lord Reaper of Pike. The Greyjoys had once boasted a proud lineage of kings before the rise of the Black Line. Lord Vigon swore a solemn oath of fealty to King Aegon and became the first Lord of the Iron Islands. The Conqueror, in turn, issued a series of prohibitions against the Iron Men. Though he did not abolish the practice of reaving, he forbade them from raiding the shores of Westeros, and the stealing of women would henceforth be a heinous crime throughout the Seven Kingdoms, at the urging of Queen Rhaenys. To all these terms, Lord Vigon agreed. He even renounced all the lands and possessions that were seized upon the mainland. So it was that the Iron Islands were brought into Aegon's realm, and the half-ruined Harrenhal was granted to Quentyn Coharies, the old Master-at-Arms of Dragonstone. With the submission of the Three Sisters and the Iron Islands, all of Westeros south of the Wall was under the rule of House Targaryen. All save Dorne. And so Dorne was the last kingdom for Aegon to conquer. His first attempt to bring the Dornishmen in was with words. To that end, he sought to negotiate with Maria Martell, the Princess of Dorne, dispatching maesters and septons to persuade her the advantages of joining her realm to his own. All to no avail. And so finally, in 4 AC, Rhaenys Targaryen rode Meraxes into Dorne, this time with fire and blood, just as she had promised all those years ago. Thus began the First Dornish War. The Queen and her dragon set the planky town ablaze, whilst Orys Baratheon, the Lord of Storm's End and Hand of the King, led 1,000 Stormlanders through the Boneway, and King Aegon and Lord Harlan Tyrell led an army of 30,000 men through the Prince's Pass, with Balerion at their head. At every Dornish castle and keep they encountered, however, they found no enemy to fight. Orys and the Stormlords were ambushed and captured by the Will of Will, a cruel and savage mountain lord known as the Widow Lover. At Ghost Hill, the only man to face Aegon was Lord Toland. The man was swiftly cut down by the king in single combat, with Blackfire in his hand, only to discover that he had not killed Lord Toland, but his mad fool. Since then, the Tolands adopted a green dragon sigil, biting its own tail on gold, in memory of the motley worn by their courageous fool. Elsewise, the Dornish fled into the dunes, the high mountains, anywhere beyond the dragon's gaze. Even the yellow toad was nowhere to be found when Rhaenys captured Sunspear. When King Aegon joined her, he declared victory and claimed Dorne for his own. He installed Lord Rosby as the Castellan of Sunspear and the Warden of the Sands, to rule Dorne in his name. He and Rhaenys then flew their dragons back to King's Landing, triumphant. No sooner did they return to the royal city than Dorne erupted behind them. Nearly every castle the Conqueror had taken were all recaptured, his royal garrisons put to the sword, and all the knights who led them were brutally tortured. Lord Rosby, Aegon's Warden of the Sands, was thrown off the highest tower of Sunspear by the Yellow Toad herself. The Martells had clearly learned from Harrenhal and the Field of Fire. The dragons were unbeatable in battle, but wars were more than just battles. When Lord Tyrell attempted to reclaim the stolen castles and take bloody vengeance upon Lord Rosby's murderers, he and his entire army vanished into the sands, never to be seen again. The war would continue for the next 7 years and would quickly degenerate into a bloody series of atrocities, raids, and retaliations, broken up by long periods of inactivity, a dozen short truces, and numerous murders and assassinations. The Stormlands, the Dornish marches, and even Old Town itself would suffer from endless Dornish incursions one after the other, and the dragons in turn reduced countless keeps into ash and glass. When Orys Baratheon and the other Stormlords were ransomed back to King's Landing in 7 AC, they were found missing a hand, taken by the widow lover himself. Aegon's wrath was so fearsome to behold that he mounted Balerion and reduced the mountain fortresses of the Wills into mounds of molten stone. Yet the widow lover would survive and would live on for the next 20 years. But the worst was yet to come. In 10 AC, Rhaenys Targaryen and her dragon Meraxes descended upon the Hellholt, where tragedy followed. The dragons of Valyria were powerful and ferocious creatures with scales stronger than iron, but even they were not invincible. Whilst the castle was blasted in fire and ash, a scorpion bolt was loosed and pierced the queen's dragon in the right eye. The great beast and her royal rider fell from the sky and destroyed the highest tower and much of its curtain wall in her death throes. Tales and hearsay persist as to the fate of Queen Rhaenys. Some say that she fell to her death, while others claim that she was crushed beneath her dragon, and even fewer claim the queen survived, only to die in agony, tortured in the dungeons of the Hellholt. What truly happened to her will never be known, but it cannot be denied that Rhaenys Targaryen, sister wife to King Aegon I, perished in the Hellholt in 10 AC. She was a spirited, courageous woman who had compassion for all her subjects, especially the small folk, of whom she strived to improve their lives. And so, her passing was felt by much of the realm, who had loved the beautiful, kind-hearted queen. But none were more bereft than her own siblings. What followed were known as the years of the dragon's wrath. Grief-stricken at the death of their beloved sister, King Aegon and Queen Visenya set ablaze every castle, keep, and holdfast in Dorne, save for Sunspear and its Shadow City. Why? The Dornish claimed that Maria Martell had purchased a dragon-killing weapon from Lys. Others assert that the Targaryens hoped to turn the suffering Dornishmen against House Martell. Yet if that were the case, they failed. Then came the least glorious phase of the war. When dragons and armies could not subdue their enemies, the Targaryens turned to the shadows instead. They placed prices on the heads of the Dornish lords, and half a dozen and more were killed by assassins. But only 2 of the killers ever lived to collect their rewards. The Dornish responded in kind, and many lords were butchered by countless catspaws and assassins. Even in the heart of King's Landing, no one was safe, not even the Conqueror. Aegon was attacked on 3 separate occasions, and Queen Visenya and her escorts were set upon by Dornish cutthroats. 2 of her guards died before she cut down the last of the killers herself with Dark Sister in hand. It was truly a black time. Yet in all that chaos was born one glorious thing: the sworn brotherhood of the King's Guard. Initially, Aegon was reluctant, confident that his guardsmen were sufficient protectors, until Visenya cut the king's cheek with Dark Sister so quickly that the guards could not react.
Your guards are slow and lazy. I could have killed you as easily as I cut you. You require better protection.
Clutching his bleeding cheek, Aegon finally saw the wisdom in her argument. It was Visenya, not Aegon, who laid the foundation of the Order. She modeled their vows on those of the Night's Watch. Like the black-cloaked protectors of the Wall, the white swords served for life, forsaking all lands, titles, and past allegiances to serve none but the king. They were likewise sworn to ensure the sanctity of the royal family. And since Aegon was the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, 7 champions would guard and protect him, sworn to chastity and obedience. So many volunteers came forth that the king contemplated hosting a great tourney, until Visenya dissuaded him, arguing that he needed more than men who were skilled in arms to protect him. He needed unwavering loyalty, and so she personally selected the first members of the Order herself. They range from hedge knights to younger sons to heirs of ancient lineage, from tall to short, dark and fair. All were quick, strong, observant, skilled in arms, and devoted to the king. The White Book, the great chronicle of the Kingsguard, has recounted their names, as it has for all those who swore the vows. Richard Root, Addison Hill, the bastard of Cornfield, the brothers Gregor and Griffith Good, the hedge knight Sir Humphrey the Mummer, Robin Darkland, also known as Dark Robin, the first of many Darklands to wear the white cloak, and Corlys Velaryon, the first Lord Commander. Visenya Targaryen chose her champions well. 2 died protecting the king, and the rest would serve with valor for the rest of their lives. From that day onward, the Kingsguard would resemble the embodiment of honor and chivalry throughout the 7 kingdoms. As the war raged on, Dorne itself became a blighted, ruined land. Still, the Dornishmen fought on stubbornly from the shadows, refusing to surrender. But in 13 AC, age and ill health finally claimed the life of Maria Martell. Her 60-year-old son, the aged and frail Nymor, succeeded her as the Prince of Dorne. Unlike his mother, he had no appetite for war, and so he sent his daughter, Daria, to King's Landing with terms of peace. But this would be a peace between 2 sovereign kingdoms, not between a rebel and a liege. It was strongly opposed by many within the city, Queen Visenya and Orys Baratheon among them, chanting, "No peace without submission." The king was on the point of refusing Daria's terms and continuing the war, until she handed the king a letter from her father. A letter for his eyes only. Aegon read it upon the Iron Throne, and when he rose, his hands were bleeding. He burned the letter and departed immediately on Balerian's back for Dragonstone. When he returned the next day, he agreed to Nymor's terms and signed a treaty of eternal peace with Dorne. What was within Daenerys' letter that gave Aegon Targaryen such pause? Many speculations arose, from pleas to threats to malign sorceries. The most compelling argument was that if the king continued the war, Nymor would engage the Faceless Men, the sorcerer assassins of Braavos, to slay Aegon's son and heir, Aenys. Whatever the letter contained, no man could say. The Yellow Toad had done what her rivals tried and failed. She defeated Aegon Targaryen and his dragons, and kept Dorne independent. Whilst the lords of Aegon's realm denounced her as a coward, she was lauded by her fellow Dornishmen as a hero, one who fought stubbornly for freedom. Other Targaryen kings attempted to conquer Dorne and finish what the Conqueror had started, but none would succeed. Only Daeron the Good finally managed to bring the Dornishmen into the Seven Kingdoms in 187 AC, and not with fire and blood, but with marriage and friendship. The end of the First Dornish War would be marked as Aegon the Conqueror's one great defeat, and his final war. The end of the Dragon's Wars would give way to the Dragon's Peace, a lawful, pious, and glorious age. Despite the frustrations of his failed Dornish War, Aegon the First Targaryen accomplished much and more than any other man. At just 27 years of age, he conquered much of the continent. But it is one thing to conquer, and quite another to rule. It required a truly remarkable man to hold all the warring kingdoms together. Fortunately, Aegon was such a man. He might have brought fire and blood to Westeros, but during his 37-year reign, he brought peace, plenty, and justice. It was he who envisioned a royal capital that would surpass Lannisport and Old Town as the greatest city of the realm. For 25 years, King's Landing grew from a modest fishing village to surpassing White Harbor as one of the three great cities of the Seven Kingdoms. But for a long while, it was a city without walls. Its denizens boasted that it needed none, as the mere presence of dragons would deter any invader. But once word had spread of a daring pirate raid in the Summer Isles, the king commanded that walls be raised. By 26 AC, they were completed, standing as high and proud as those guarding Old Town and Lannisport. Yet while King's Landing had been designated as Aegon's royal seat, he would always spend half a year on Dragonstone, the ancient seat of House Targaryen, for he always loved the smell of sulfur and brimstone. Near the end of his reign, he ordered the old and overgrown Aegon Fort to be torn down, and began work on the construction of a castle worthy of a great king. In the fullness of time, it would be known as the Red Keep. He would never live to see it completed. That task would be left to his sons to finish. During his reign, the Conqueror sought to win the respect of his new vassals and subjects. To that end, he embarked on a series of royal progresses all throughout the Seven Kingdoms. From Winterfell to Old Town, he would guest beneath the roofs of the great lords of the realm. He even slept in inns and crossroad villages. The king believed that it was better to forestall rebellions than to put them down, and riding upon Balerion the Dread, with 1,000 knights at his rear, did much to curb the restlessness in his lords. He awed his subjects, and when necessary, he frightened them. Not only did knights accompany him, but maesters, septons, and much of the king's court, including one of his queens, while the other remained in King's Landing or on Dragonstone. 6 maesters would personally advise the king on local laws and customs of the former realms, to rule and judge as their former kings had done of yore. Though he regularized taxes and shipping, he did not change any of the old laws, for his chief concern was peace. That task would be left to his grandson, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, to accomplish. The small council that Aegon had established during the conquest remained his principal advisors in all things regarding the realm, from shipping to taxation to laws. In 5 AC, at his insistence, the office of Grand Maester was created, a maester selected by the conclave who would personally advise the king in all matters regarding to the governance of the realm. While he kept a septon at King's Landing and on Dragonstone, the king would more often look to the High Septon of Old Town for spiritual guidance. In fact, many of the early Targaryen kings had to tread carefully with the faith, for they still wielded considerable power within the 7 kingdoms, save in the north and the Iron Islands. Yet above all, he relied upon the king's hand for guidance, as well as his sisters. When Orys Baratheon returned from Dornish captivity missing a hand, he retired from that office, not wishing to be mocked as the king's stump. And so Lord Baratheon returned to Storm's End with a new name, Orys One Hand. Many hands came and went for King Aegon, but none would be as trusted as his half-brother. But even the king's hand would pale before his greatest advisors, his sisters, Queen Rhaenys and Queen Visenya. While Aegon was the ultimate authority, the 2 sisters handled much of the daily task of ruling the realm, alongside the king's council. No other queen in the history of the 7 kingdoms ever wielded as much influence over policy as the Dragon sisters. They were not simple consorts. They were Aegon's partners in power. They arranged many marriages from one end of the realm to another, to bind the 7 kingdoms into one. Each queen was a power in her own right, and both left their own marks upon the realm. While Visenya would establish the Kingsguard later on, Rhaenys had been an avid patroness in bards and singers, and many would be added to her retinue. Though her sister believed this to be wasteful, they spread many a song in praise of House Targaryen throughout the 7 kingdoms, presenting the conquest as a glorious feat, making Aegon a hero king. Rhaenys was likewise a champion to the small folk, and had a great care for women and children. One day, when she sat the Iron Throne, a petition was made by the brothers of a woman who had been beaten to death by her husband after he had caught her abed with another. The husband defended himself by citing that it was lawful to chastise an unfaithful wife, and that the rod he struck her with was no bigger than a thumb. But the brothers accused him of striking her 100 times. Once the queen deliberated with her septons and maesters, she declared that while the 7 made women to be dutiful to their husbands and could be lawfully beaten, only 6 blows were permissible, 1 for each of the 7, save the stranger, who was death. For this reason, she declared that 94 of the husband's blows had been unlawful, and that the brothers were allowed to match those blows upon the husband. Thus the rule of 6 and the rule of thumb was added to the common law. Beyond policy, the Dragon sisters each delivered the king a son. Rhaenys was first, giving birth to Aenys in 7 AC, and later Visenya with Maegor in 12 AC. His dynasty secured, Aegon possessed an heir and a spare. From 1 AC to 37 AC, Aegon the Dragon ruled the united 7 kingdoms with wisdom and forbearance. He died at the place of his birth, on his beloved Dragonstone. Within the chamber of the painted table, he showed his grandsons, Aegon and Viserys, the details of his conquest, when all of a sudden, he suffered a stroke and collapsed. He was but 63 years old at the time of his death. In accordance with the ancient rites of Valyria, the king was confined to a funeral pyre in the yard of Dragonstone, where Vhagar's fires set it ablaze. Other great houses might bury their dead or sink them to the cold green seas, but the Targaryens were the blood of the dragon, and their ends were writ in flame. The dragon was survived by his sister Visenya, his 2 sons Aenys and Maegor, and 5 grandchildren, Rhaena, Aegon, Viserys, Jaehaerys, and Alysanne. His son and heir, Aenys, was at Highgarden at the time of his father's death, yet he flew swiftly to Dragonstone. There he was declared as King Aenys I. Thus, the glorious age of Aegon the Conqueror had passed, and the troubled reign of the Sons of the Dragon began.